also specifies that it is a bi-directional connection. The work program is mandated to inform other relevant processes, including the annual high-level ministerial roundtable on just transition, and take into consideration its outcomes as appropriate. In this spirit, we are grateful for the opportunity to look back at this first year of implementation and share focuses on the importance of this work program for the outside world. From the many submissions we have received, to the well-attended dialogues and the interventions during contact group sessions, the implementation of the work program has highlighted the great interest in just transition by a wide range of non-party stakeholders. From youth activists to private sector, from trade unions to academia, from indigenous and local communities to women's rights organizations, from local governments to farmers. Just transition is for all, and all want to have their voices heard. It would be good to listen carefully to those voices coming from outside the process. A just transition will never truly be just if the voices that are given a platform are just those of the decision makers. I now pass the floor to my friend Harry to continue.
Thank you, Nabil. Excellencies, ministers, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. It's also for me a great pleasure to be with you here and join the SBI chair in sharing our reflections as we look back at the first year of the implementation. In complementing Nabil's remarks, the second message we wish to emphasize highlight some of the emerging themes from the many submissions we have received from parties and non-party stakeholders, as well as from the 2 dialogues held under the work program this year. Despite that the topics of the 2 dialogues focused on distinguished aspects of just transition, the emerging themes were common. The first focused on just transition pathways to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement through the different instruments like the LDCs, NAPs, and long-term SLATs, and ensuring support for people-centric and equitable just transition pathways with an emphasis on the whole society approach and the workforce. The common themes resolve around that there is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to just transition. The crucial role of just transition is in leaving no one behind, the importance of ensuring a whole society and a whole of economy approach to just transition, and the need to expand concepts such as the workforce to also include the informal sector, the care economy, the unemployed, and future workers. I hope, together with Nabil, that these common themes will inspire you to find commonalities in your high level and change today. Our third and final message is on the important role of your exchange as we move into the second year of the implementing of the UAA work program. One of today's key questions focused on parties' expectations regarding this work program and invites you to reflect on how it can serve as an effective tool for assisting parties in further defining and implementing their climate plans in the context of just transition pathways that promote sustainable development of this opportunity by considering how the work program can support parties in integrating just transition principles, both domestically and internationally, into the climate actions. We hope our reflections will inspire your exchange today and that this ministerial roundtable will provide a fertile ground for high-level engagement on parties' key priorities to shape the direction of the Just Transition Work Programme. Thank you, and back to you, co-chairs.
Thank you, distinguished co-chairs. I recognize you also have other commitments, and we'll allow you a moment to get to your next commitments. Now I would like to give the floor over to my co-chair, Her Excellency Karine James, for her remarks.
Thank you so very much, Excellency Allender. Excellencies, the Just Transition Work Programme is an opportunity to advance the achievement of 1.5 aligned emissions development pathways in various national contexts and circumstances, advocating for a whole-of-society and cross-cutting approach to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It is well positioned to support parties to address the social dimensions of climate action holistically and ensure a fair and inclusive transformation to a low-carbon economy. The Just Transition Work Programme, ladies and gentlemen, should be anchored in the best available science aligned with the 1.5 pathway. To advance just transition as an important element of the implementation of the agreement, we cannot forget to incorporate both adaptation and resilience building. Thank you. I will now hand over to my co-chair, Her Excellency Allender, for her framing interventions as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. James. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start that a just transition is crucial in the UN FFC process. This is where we can turn challenges into opportunities. Just transition is first and foremost about people, workforce, and households in vulnerable situations, most affected by climate risks and by the transition to net zero societies. We need to have a meaningful social dialogue with all the stakeholders, which enables them to participate in finding the best solutions in building climate-resilient societies. In this context, the Just Transition Work Programme is a global reaffirmation and a key tool to reach net zero emissions as soon as possible, while reaping the transformative social, economic, and environmental benefits of this necessary transition. As parties worldwide continue to update and implement their nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans, there is climate-resilient societies and drive greater climate ambition and action. Thank you. Let's now turn to our decisions. Colleagues, the Decision 1 CMA4 clearly affirmed that sustainable and just solutions to the climate crisis must be founded on meaningful and effective social dialogue and participation of all stakeholders, and noted that the global transition to low emissions provides opportunities and challenges for sustainable economic development and poverty eradication. It also emphasized that just and equitable transition encompasses pathways that include energy, socioeconomic, workforce, and other dimensions, all of which must be based on nationally defined development priorities and include social protection so as to mitigate potential impacts associated with the transition. It also decided that such pathways include international cooperation as an enabler of just transition towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. The Decision 3 CMA5 provided additional guidance on the operationalization of the work program and decided that the work program will inform the second global stocktake and other relevant processes, including the annual high-level Ministerial roundtable on just transition. It also noted that the outcomes of the relevant work of the UNFCCC constituted bodies and under other UNFCCC work streams of the annual high-level ministerial roundtable on just transition and of the ongoing work on pathways to just transition outside the UNFCCC process may be taken into consideration under the work program as appropriate. In that context, and following the first annual high-level ministerial roundtable on just transition held last December in Dubai, this second annual high-level ministerial roundtable on just transition will provide a platform for a political discussion on the implementation of and direction for the United Arab Emirates Just Transition Work Programme. I would also like to announce that this event is being webcast on the COP29 virtual platform, and simultaneous translation is provided into the official UN languages. So from here, we will turn to remarks also led by my colleague, Ms. James, please. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Co-Chair Excellency Allender. Excellencies, Decision 1, CMA4 affirmed that sustainable and just solutions to the climate crisis to low emissions provide opportunities and challenges for sustainable economic development and poverty eradication. In this context, this roundtable aims to facilitate a focused exchange of information on facilitating a just and equitable transition. And we are looking forward to rich and constructive discussions on the direction of the United Arab Emirates Just Transition Work Programme and an enhanced understanding of how the work programme on just transition can better support countries' climate goals. For the purpose of the roundtable, the guiding questions are aimed at highlighting priorities, needs, and challenges faced by countries in progressing with the implementation of the just transition. These endeavors are crucial for staying on course to attain the goal outlined in the Paris Agreement. The first question is, Excellencies, how can parties advance their just transition pathways in the context of preparation and implementation for the next round of NDCs and NAPs? We encourage you to discuss. Also, how international cooperation and support on the full range of means of implementation can assist parties to advance their just transition pathways in the context of NDCs and NAPs? The second question, Excellencies, is, what are the expectations of parties with regards to the UAE Just Transition Work Programme, and how can it serve as an effective tool for assisting parties in further defining and implementing their climate plans in the context of just transition pathways that promote sustainable development and poverty eradication? At this point, Excellencies, we will open the floor for interventions and invite those who have raised their flags to speak with the following sequence. Priority will be given first to ministers, with other parties' representatives given the floor afterwards. Due to the high interest, we would appreciate if you could keep your interventions below 3 minutes so that it is possible to accommodate all speakers in the allocated time. In case time allows, other participants may take the floor after the interventions from the parties. Before we begin, we would like to draw your attention to a few housekeeping rules. To request the floor, please raise your flag and press the button on the device in front of you. To begin with this session, I am going to welcome Colombia, followed by the UK. Colombia, you have the floor. I would ask of you, once you hear your name called, you would press the button that looks as a speaking emoji, and you begin. Perhaps there seems to be some technical difficulties.
Come use this, hello? Can you come over here? Can you come over here?
No, it's not working. Ah, yeah. Sorry. Critical question, the question of just transitions. In the case of Colombia, but I am, and we are thinking probably is not the only case, the just transition is a whole of economy transition. And it means, as a coal exporter and oil producer, that we need to think, how are we going to replace the fiscal income and the dependency on the export of fossil fuels? And what are the sectors in the economy that will replace that income in the time that science has given us and that we have agreed in the Paris Agreement to be able to stabilize the temperature at 1.5. And if you think about it, it is not an endeavor that has been done before in the history of countries, creating whole new sectors of the economy in the time of a decade, decade and a half, to replace the income of the export of fossil fuels of any other economic sector. So when you ask what is the collaboration that is required, the cooperation, the international support, we reply back that with the current conditions on the financial system and the economic process and the inequality of that economic process, is very difficult to be able to make the transition. And that's why emissions keep increasing, production of fossil fuels keep increasing, because I ask everybody in the room, who will put their economy at risk first without the guarantees to move forward? Now, is that an excuse to not do anything and to amplify the climate change impacts, which every 5 years, when we're gonna define the collective goal on finance, will be more expensive if we don't do anything? The Colombian answer is not. And that's why, even if this forum is not the only forum where we have to discuss this, we have to talk about the fair access to capital, the trade agreements, and how to deploy technology in an effective way, the supply and demand side of fossil fuels, and the deep economic questions of the fossil fuel economy that until now this process has not addressed. And because we don't but we need to shift the conditions of power. Otherwise, we will reproduce the same inequality of development that we have now. And we just leave and conclude with some questions. How can we start the energy transition from the most vulnerable people in the world that do not have access on electricity from renewable power? How can we, at the same time, strengthen our natural capacity, restore nature, work with communities on the countries that still have nature, and that nature is serving everybody, so this crisis is not worse, and how can that be valued in the macroeconomic system? How can we work together to bring a transition regime for life, an economic transition regime that put public finance first and is able to lower the capital access for the transition as a political pact and not leave to the markets who can access and who cannot access capital, or worst, to the investors' risk qualification agencies that brings currencies of countries down and impede that we advance together. It is time for politics to take control again and multilateralism to take control again in a political pact for the change. Otherwise, we will continue with the current system of NDCs. Everybody do what you can with what you have, which in the end is leaving us with a lot of people behind, and actually with the climate crisis becoming worse and worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Excellency. We now move to the UK, followed by Kenya on behalf of the AGN.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And can I just say what a privilege it is to follow my brilliant and inspiring colleague from Colombia following her contribution. And it is a huge privilege to join this roundtable. There is no more important question that we face as a world than how we ensure the just transition. And it might look on the face of it like we have lots that divide us, but I want to argue that there is more that unites us. In the UK, we have, as a new government, been elected with a mandate to have no new oil and gas licenses. That is a commitment that we have made as a developed country. We also, with the importance of our North Sea, have a huge challenge to ensure a just transition, and it is a challenge that we are determined to surmount, because we do not want to replace determined to play our part domestically, and we are determined to play our part internationally to do that. So what are the three things that we need to do as part of the just transition process? First, and again, this follows what my colleague from Colombia said, and this is part of the Just Transition work program. We need to recognize that the reason we need this just transition is because of the science and the evidence all around us, including tragically recently in Colombia, around the extreme weather events that are affecting all of our countries. And so we must be guided by the commitment to 1.5 degrees. And we know we are way off track from where we need to be. Secondly, and this is such an important point compared to where we were as a world 15 years ago, we must deliver a just transition, and we can deliver a just transition because we have an alternative to fossil fuels. And what my colleague said, and what is one of the tasks of this conference, is absolutely right, which is to ensure that the finance flows to developing countries in order to enable them to pursue this path of development, this low carbon, zero carbon path of development. And part of that is the transition away from fossil fuels that was agreed at COP28. And third, we need to build on the findings of the two Just Transition dialogues this year, which means recognizing the importance of workforce, education systems, labor rights, and social protection enabling a just transition. Let me just say this lastly, because in a way the contributions of my colleague and me tell us something about the way this conference can move forward, which is, as I said at the beginning, while it might look like there are big differences between global north and global south, in fact there is a lot that unites us. We face different constraints, but we also share a common humanity, and we know that the climate crisis knows no borders. And I believe at this conference we can work together for a successful outcome, including a just transition. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Kenya. UK, sorry, I now move to Kenya on behalf of AGN.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. I'll take the floor on behalf of the African group. The just transition connects the climate action with sustainable development and in the context of high levels of inequality within and between countries. Our co-chairs, Africa is at the beginning of its transition journey, with much still to be formulated and implemented in the way of policies and action. The continent has contributed only 3% to global emissions, demanding a robust consideration of Africa's space for development and fair contribution of other regions to enable a just transition compatible with sustainable development and in line with common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities. Our co-chairs, Africa is disproportionately exposed to double burden of climate risks and impacts and transition risks arising from global and domestic actions outside the continent. African countries face a lack of means of implementation, limited fiscal space, high capital cost, unsustainable debt burdens, limited access to technologies, and other impeding factors. The United Arab Emirates Just Transition Work Program is a critical vehicle within the UNFCCC to surface, characterize, integrate issues of just and fairness in transition across the UNFCCC and send signal outside the process to effectively support implementation of the Paris Agreement. Our co-chairs, in terms of responding to the questions on how parties can advance just transition pathways, first, pathways towards implementing the goals of the Paris Agreement are nationally determined, defined through NDCs and NAPs. Countries could be encouraged to include just transition elements such as inclusivity, equitable distribution of benefits and opportunities for vulnerable populations, including women, youth, informal sector, workers, among others. This should not be main focus of the discussion under the multilateral space. However, the Paris Agreement is clear in its Article 2.2. Implementation of Paris Agreement goals will be the context of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities. Secondly, developed countries parties should take the lead in emission reduction pursuant to Article 4 of the Paris Agreement and should consequently achieve net zero emissions earlier than developing countries, and developed countries to pursue their just transitions while recognizing that pathways will differ in timing, scope for developing countries to allow policy and fiscal space towards sustainable development with a view of achieving an orderly and equitable transition amongst parties. Third, adaptation in the context of just transition approaches is extremely important for Africa in light of international barriers and challenges. Emphasis must be put on understanding on how adaptation to impacts of climate change and broader resilience processes challenges toward just transition and societies. Pathways of adaptation action and support should therefore adequately respond to the risks and needs of developing countries. Fourth, climate finance provided by developed countries should be commensurate with the mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage needs of developing countries in line with 1.5 degree temperature goal, in line with nationally defined priorities, and provided primarily through international public finance and instruments that do not lead to further indebtedness of developing countries. Fourth, international cooperation is necessary to mobilize additional and appropriate and adequate quality finance at a manageable cost and increasing grant international barriers and challenges that persist must be addressed, notably the transboundary impacts of climate change related to policy, related to response measures, international policies, rules, measures on trade, tax, debt that have direct and indirect impacts on the viability and fairness of transition planning and implementation, especially for developing countries and least developed countries. Domestic policies, rules, measures, such as CBAM, IRA, that have significant outward impacts, particularly for developing countries. All these points must be considered and addressed through the UAE Just Transition Work Program. Co-chairs, in response to the second questions, the focus of the work program should integrate equity and fairness in transition towards the goal of the Paris Agreement. This is at the heart of climate action. The key areas of focus of the work program was agreed in Dubai, including adaptation, mitigation, finance, international cooperation, implications of transitions for sustainable development, and poverty eradication, workforce considerations, as well as inclusivity and leaving no one behind. There's need for an expansion of scope beyond formal workers to include informal sectors and forward-looking high-quality job creation. African states and businesses must be empowered to harness economic opportunities in a transitioning global economy. In the context of high climate and transition risk exposure, and build competitiveness in new and configure value chains, particularly in renewable energy and agriculture. We must also foster dialogues that are necessary for sufficient modality for implementation of the work program. And that the work program should be organized around concrete actions, outputs, timelines to achieve real outcomes to support just transition more effectively at multilateral level. The work program, therefore, should guide how justice and equity is integrated in implementation of the goals of the Paris Agreement. Secondly, identify transboundary risks and opportunities and inform international cooperation. Third, send signals to the international cooperation ecosystem to support parties in their transition. And finally, contribute to the provision of means of implementation and unlocking of additional quality finance to deliver just access to economic opportunities, just decarbonization, just resilience for sustainable development. We hope we can agree on the development through the party-driven process of a just transition guidance work for the integration of principles of equity and fairness in the implementation of climate action within and outside the UNFCCC across domestic, global scales, including sending signals as appropriate. We should establish the necessary mechanisms and processes to complement the dialogues. For example, technical papers, establish dedicated task team nominated by parties to support this objective, and develop a draft framework and tools for considerations by the CMA. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies, I would like to remind you that due to high interest, I ask of you, please, to keep your interventions below 3 minutes so that we can accommodate everyone who wishes to take the floor. I now turn over to the EU. You have the floor now to make your intervention.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dear Excellencies, time for action is short, and keeping the 1.5 Celsius degree temperature limit within reach requires quick and impactful actions also on the ground. And for those to happen, it is essential for the European Union that domestic climate policies operationalize their contribution for a truly systemic transformation. In this context, the Just Transition Work Programme is a key tool to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible while reaping the transformative social, economic, and environmental benefits of these necessary transitions. With regards to the first guiding question, the EU sees the just transition as an enabling higher ambitions for accelerated mitigation and adaptation. We have to continue our social development and economic growth through job creation, improvements in job quality, education and training, economic diversification, and social protection measures. And we believe that meaningful stakeholder involvement from the very start of designing and implementing LDCs and NAPs is crucial to ensure success of those policies and actions. So therefore, we introduced a very thorough public consultation when we are talking about climate neutrality by 2050, including consultation with affected workers, vulnerable communities, indigenous people, and local communities, as well as social dialogue with all of the social partners, including trade unions, employers, and governments. So we are believing that we have to ensure a proper engagement of the main stakeholders, contributing to an accelerated mitigation and adaptation. And with regards to the second question, I hand over the floor to my colleague, Wopke.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. I think it is crystal clear for us that towards the problem at large, we need to act now and we need to act fast. And yet we have a clear imperative that we leave no one behind. And it is in this context that the Just Transition Work Programme is, in our view, a global reaffirmation and a key tool to make sure that this transition is first and foremost about all of our people. And just to articulate what others have stressed as well, the benefits and the fairness of a just transition is huge. It would include job creation, improvements in job quality and incomes, education and training. It would imply economic diversification. It would imply social protection measures and access to essential services such as clean, affordable energy and public transportation. And these are all elements, dear friends, that are addressed under this framework. But I would add one thing. It would also mean putting the health and well-being of all individuals and all of our communities, particularly in the most vulnerable countries, front and center, as we should. So there's a lot we need to do. There's a lot we could learn from each other. And we're very much looking forward to constructively discuss to make progress in the Just Transition Work Programme. But in the end, the proof of the pudding at this COP is also in the eating. We need clear messages on a just transition at this COP. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Excellencies. I now turn over to Tuvalu on behalf of AOSIS. You have the floor to make your intervention.
Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, and colleagues, it is truly an honor to be here this afternoon. Tuvalu is speaking on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. Let me, co-chairs, reiterate the importance of keeping on track with the global temperature goal. Every decision we make in Baku must be guided by our ultimate goal, the Paris Agreement. On question 1, prioritizing climate resilience for vulnerable nations. For small island developing states, SIDS, a just transition must prioritize climate adaptation. Given our high vulnerability to rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss, our NDCs and NAPs must address this risk while incorporating principles of justice, equity, in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Localizing just transition approaches. A one-size-fits-all approach is ineffective. We need pathways that reflect the unique economic, environmental, and social conditions of SIDS, particularly regarding high dependence on tourism and natural resources. Funding and technology transfer. For SIDS, achieving just transition goals is financially and technologically intensive. International support is crucial for funding resilient infrastructure, renewable energy, and sustainable livelihoods. Technology transfer agreements, specifically for renewable energy, coastal defense, and disaster response, can be a significant resource. Capacity building and skill development. Training and skill developments for communities in emerging economy sectors and green sectors will support the shift to sustainable jobs. There are also needs to be the reskilling, retooling, and reschoolings of persons from all sectors, which will be impacted by the transition. We need international cooperation to establish programs and vocational training that support workforce transition, especially in sectors like tourism, fisheries, and agriculture. Enhance international support mechanisms. There must be mechanisms that go beyond pledges to ensure predictable, accessible finance support and technical assistance. On question 2, framework for defining and implementing just transition. It is the view of AOSIS that UAE Just Transition Work Programme should offer clear frameworks and guidance that allow countries to define their just transition pathways within the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication. These frameworks must acknowledge and adapt to the unique socio-economic realities of different regions. Focus on poverty eradication and sustainable livelihoods. For SIDS, poverty eradication and sustainable economic development are core objectives. We expect the work program to promote initiatives that target poverty reduction as part of climate transition, such as promoting climate resilient jobs and protecting vulnerable communities from climate impacts. Inclusive stakeholder engagement. The work program should foster collaboration across government, private sector, civil society to ensure inclusive, transparent, equitable transition. SIDS are often sidelined in high-level decisions. We need a program that genuinely includes and supports voices of our regions. Promoting nature-based solutions and ecosystem protection. SIDS rely heavily on natural ecosystems, which are crucial to both our economies and resilience strategies. The UAE work program should emphasize nature-based solutions and coastal resilience strategies as essential components of a just transition for island states. Encountering and encouraging knowledge and data sharing, access to climate impact data and adaptation solution can strengthen NDCs and NEPs. The UAE work program should facilitate an international repository for sharing adaptation successes and challenges to allow CIST and other vulnerable nations to benefit from existing knowledge. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I now turn the floor over to Ethiopia on behalf of LDCs. Ethiopia, you have the floor.
Thank you, co-chairs. Ethiopia speaks on behalf of LDC Group and its 45 member states who are mostly vulnerable to the growing impact of climate change. For LDC, just transition must prioritize energy access, poverty reduction, eradication, debt sustainability, green job creation, social equity, and then the adequate provision of means of implementation. This is not an exhaustive list. We face the challenge of transforming our economy with limited resource, fragile infrastructure, and then disproportionate exposure to climate risk. A holistic approach to a just transition should move beyond traditional sectors like fossil fuel and should also focus on other sectors imposed by climate change, particularly those with growth potential aligned with low carbon development and poverty reduction. The informal sector must be considered as these workers lack social protection and are crucial to achieve a people-centered transition. The focus on the transition should be on investing in green and decent jobs from start, fostering a forward-thinking approach to workforce development. Given the agriculture, the natural resource, the informal economic dominate in LDC, it is essential to prioritize social protection for both formal and informal workers and communities at risk of being left behind. We also recognize the importance of adaptation indicators, which are critical for measuring progress in enhancing climate resilience and ensuring sustainable climate resilience as well as just development. In this context, we call for a strong international cooperation to provide the financial resource, technology transfer, and capacity building needed for our success. We were pleased to see that the UAE decision on Just Transition Work Program recognized the LDC special needs and circumstances as enshrined in the Paris Agreement and Convention. So our ask is very clear. We need an outcome under Just Transition Work Program. We look forward for its operational on the implementation of the working program. This work program must benefit all. We cannot afford to leave Baku without an outcome. Colleagues, we are concerned with the lack of progress observed in technical negotiation last week. We want our work program to move towards discussing substantial elements, including support mechanism to address our special needs and circumstances. We need to scale up capacity building efforts and technology transfer and knowledge sharing while avoiding technology dumping of older technologies, which is not often recycled to countries such as LDC. Without a clear and reliable commitment of international support for efforts and ambition of LDC risk remaining aspirational rather than actionable. We therefore call for flexibility and collective efforts towards making progress. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ethiopia. I now give the floor to Norway. You have the floor for your intervention.
Thank you, Excellencies and colleagues. Just transition is about how we manage change in a way that creates and preserves welfare for all. Just transition pathways will be different from country to country. At the same time, we are all in this transition together, so we should learn from each other's experiences. For Norway, our just transition pathway is fundamentally about three things. First, inclusivity and meaningful participation in our transition to a low-emission society. As an example, when we are developing and implementing our NDC, this is done on a basis of a broad public hearing and consultation. Second, it is about creating opportunities by fostering new green and decent jobs. In that process, social dialogue through our tripartite cooperation is fundamental. We need a labor force with skills fit for a low-emission future. Education and training and reskilling is crucial for us. Third, just transition is about leaving no one behind by respecting human rights and designing our policies in a way that do not adversely affect vulnerable groups in our population. I believe that our welfare state model, which goes far beyond climate policies, is the best and most effective response to just transition. International cooperation fosters understanding and awareness among governments and among those engaged in shaping our low-emission future. International cooperation can show best practices on how we ensure and speed up a just transition. We already see positive initiatives coming forward in support to just transition pathways in developing countries. In shaping the solutions for just transition pathways, a broad set of actors and arenas must be mobilized. We believe that the UAA Just Transition Work Programme can play an important role in bringing together parties and non-parties, in pointing to solutions and in giving us signals on how to move forward. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Excellency. I now give the floor to Fiji for your intervention.
Thank you, Excellency. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I begin by conveying my support for the views expressed by the Honorable Dr. Mai Natalia on behalf of AOSIS. On the first question, Excellency, through Fiji's years of constructive engagement and experiences, particularly as a former COP president, we appreciate the fact that by integrating robust adaptation measures into NAPs, SIDS can better prepare for and respond to climate impacts such as sea level rise, extreme weather events, and changing precipitation patterns. For Fiji, Excellencies, the frameworks and plans related to NAPs are critical, reviewed and updated, given our high vulnerability to rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss. Our NCDs and NAPs are developed to address these risks while incorporating principles of justice and equity in the transition to a low-carbon economy. For Fiji and other SIDS, achieving such transition goals is financially and technologically intensive. International support is crucial for funding resilient infrastructure, renewable energy, and sustainable livelihoods. Technology transfer agreements, specifically for renewable energy, coastal defense, and disaster response, can be a significant resource. However, reskilling, skills development, and capacity building are crucial components of advancing just transition pathways for us, SIDS, and in particular for us here from the Pacific, PSIDS. And these efforts ensure that the workforce is prepared for that shift to a green economy and that communities are resilient to climate impacts. Conversely, when I reflect on the second question, we anticipate that the Just Transition Work Program to leverage the crucial international cooperation that is required in order to meet this shift. Access for SIDS has never been as critical as it is right now, and access to advanced technology and expertise has never been as critical as it is right now. We expect the work program to recognize that a just transition will consider the special needs and circumstances of SIDS, ensuring access to finance and capacity building, as well as technology development and transfer. Just transition approaches should enhance adaptation and climate resilience in support of sustainable development and poverty eradication. The work program should also foster collaboration across all sectors to ensure inclusive, transparent, and equitable transition. Excellencies, Fiji and other SIDS rely heavily on natural ecosystems, which are critical to both our economies and resilient strategies. So we urge for the inclusion and strong emphasis on nature-based solutions and coastal resilience strategies as essential components of a just transition for island states. Therefore, Excellencies, I conclude my initial reflections on the two questions asked by asking my own question to my fellow ministers and the COP presidency. What are the actionable solutions that this COP will deliver, which reflect the momentum required to deliver on the outcomes of the Paris Agreement, ensuring that we keep 1.5 alive? Our survival cannot be negotiated. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiji. I now give the floor to the USA for your intervention.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. A just transition, first and foremost, needs to be a people-centric transition, not as an afterthought, not as an add-on, but first and foremost. It's, of course, the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. It's good policy, and very important in all our countries, durable policy. The United States is eager to join in this conversation and to learn from each other. With that in mind, I want to share one specific example of a core part of our just transition, our people-centric transition. It's something we call our Community Benefits Plan requirement. First of all, this is a requirement. This is not an add-on. This is something fundamental if you want to get federal funding from this administration, whether a grant or a loan. You have to have this as a core part of your application to tap into that federal resource. We've now applied this at over $80 billion US of funding in grants and loans. It's rigorous. It's consistent with ILO guidelines, but it's also flexible to the specific technology, the specific project, the specific community. With that, let me give you just a few examples, and I could literally pick out hundreds of examples with that $80 billion in funding. In our Pacific Northwest, we've got a green hydrogen hub. The folks working that hub not only have sound technology, but they've literally worked with labor and community leaders from the get-go as part of that application. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Pennsylvania meeting with company leaders and workers at a new battery manufacturing facility. This is a plant that was abandoned 3 years ago, and now they have 650 new workers. And just to talk with that management team, talk with those workers, was just inspiring to see what they've been able to do together. So as we continue this discussion, we would urge there to be forums and opportunities to learn specific examples This is such a core part of what we all need to be doing. Let's learn from each other in real time. We certainly have no time to waste. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, USA. I now give the floor over to Niue for your intervention.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, I would like to thank you, Chair, for allowing me to take the floor. I would like to also align my support with the views conveyed by the Honourable Minister from Tuvalu on behalf of AOSIS, as well as one of the Honourable Ministers from Fiji. Dear colleagues, our gathering today is not just a meeting of minds, but a convergence of a collective will to drive meaningful change for our planet. By incorporating adaptation measures into national adaptation plans, small island developing states can significantly enhance their preparedness and response to climate change, including sea level rise, extreme weather events, and shifting precipitation patterns. These measures are crucial for safeguarding our communities, infrastructure, and ecosystems. Practical strategies that only reduce the vulnerability of SIDS to the adverse effects of climate change, but also ensure earlier recovery and minimal economic disruption. Access to climate finance is vital for small island developing states to fund their transition and adaptation efforts. Financial support is essential for the implementation of initiatives related to mitigation and adaptation that would otherwise be unattainable. Moreover, international cooperation is crucial as it provides access to finance, technologies, and expertise, enabling mere promises, ensuring reliable and accessible financial support and technical assistance. By doing so, we expect the Just Transition Work Programme to provide climate impact data and adaptation solutions to enhance LDCs and NAPs. The UAE Work Programme should establish an international repository for sharing adaptation successes and challenges, enabling SIDS and other vulnerable nations to benefit from existing knowledge. As SIDS depend significantly on natural ecosystems, which are vital to our economies and resilience strategies, the UAE Work Programme should prioritize nature-based solutions and coastal resilience strategies as key elements of a transition for island states. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I now give the floor to the UAE to make your intervention. Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm delighted to join you today at this critical juncture in our collective journey towards a sustainable and equitable future. The topic of a just transition lies at the heart of the global response to climate change, as it challenges us to rethink the way we balance the urgent need for decarbonization with the social and economic imperatives of equity and inclusion. This is not just a technical challenge. It is a profound moral responsibility. Just transition is a key priority for the UAE. In 2015, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the UAE, said, "If our investments today is right, we will celebrate the moment we load the last barrel of oil in the future." The UAE's journey in energy and economic diversification started over 2 decades ago, while ensuring this transition leaves no one behind. This has been a foundational principle of our leadership. At COP28, inclusivity was the principle that guided us in Dubai. It was clear that delivering transformational climate action in line with science and underpinned by equity demands that all stakeholders have a seat and a voice at the table. Everyone must be part of the solution, and no one must be left behind. The UAE consensus recognizes this responsibility. The complexities of transitioning their economies in a way that safeguards livelihoods, empowers communities, and allow for sustainable development. It is with no doubt that the transition to a low-carbon economy will inevitably bear significant impact on the workforce in sectors such as energy, transport, agriculture, and tourism, amongst others. This also goes beyond the workforce. The transition is a low-carbon economy will impact entire communities and even countries, which is why it is imperative that we ensure sustainable development priorities guide the just transition into climate action. As we reflect on the importance of just transition, we must also recognize that its success hinges on our ability to work together as governments, organizations, and stakeholders. The challenges ahead are immense, but they are not insurmountable if we act with unity and purpose. We must work together under the spirit of international cooperation to ensure that the design of climate policy is comprehensive, not only in its ambition, but in the way its objectives are achieved. At the same time, the role of organizations and institutions is vital. They must provide the necessary tools, resources, and frameworks to support countries in achieving their transition goals. This includes mobilizing finance, building capacity, and fostering partnerships that enable transformative change. Today's Ministerial is an opportunity to not only reaffirm our shared commitments to a just transition, but also to take decisive actions. We must ensure that the outcome of this dialogue reflects the ambitions and priorities of all parties. The UAE remains dedicated to advancing this agenda and working with each one of you to achieve tangible and lasting progress. Let us leave this gathering with a renewed sense of unity and a clear vision for implementing the UAE Just Transition Work Program in a way that benefits us all, particularly the most vulnerable countries. Together, we can demonstrate that climate action is not only about addressing emissions, but also about building a future that is fair, inclusive, and resilient for us all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Excellency. I now give the floor to Mongolia. Excellency, you have the floor.
Presidency, Excellencies, Mongolia, known for its vast landscapes and rich nomadic heritage, shared by 3 million people, faces significant challenges from climate change. Our nomadic herders, who depend on pasture-based livestock, are particularly vulnerable as extreme winters, droughts, and ecosystem degradation threaten their way of life, culture, and livelihoods. The harsh winter, known as the Dzud, often results in severe livestock losses, stripping herders of their main source of income. Economy is also the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Current policies aim to reduce livestock numbers to decrease emissions and prevent overgrazing. However, this must be balanced with viable livelihood alternatives for herders. Mongolia's cold winters also mean limited options for heating and electricity beyond coal, as cleaner technologies remain unaffordable for vulnerable communities. Despite these challenges, we recognize that change is necessary, but it must be just protecting our most affected communities and considering our national circumstances. A just transition should be people-centered, ensuring that economic, social, and environmental impacts are balanced and no further harm is done. Mongolia acknowledges the value of nature-based solutions, leveraging opportunities in the environmental sector and using carbon market mechanisms to drive private sector-led transitions in Mongolia's upcoming NDC. As a lesson learned from the previous NDC, Mongolia aims to demonstrate creativity in engaging the private sector and demonstrate our support for involving communities and vulnerable groups. A just transition requires wholehearted dedication that goes beyond financial commitments. It demands empathy, equity, and resilience. Let us work even together to pave the way for sustainable development and inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I now give the floor to South Africa. Excellency, you have the floor to make your intervention.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, South Africa aligns ourselves with the statement delivered by the Africa Group. It is an honor to speak at this critical roundtable as we discuss the pathways towards a just transition. South Africa stands at the beginning of its transition journey, with much work ahead in shaping and implementing the necessary policies and actions. At the heart of all of our climate actions is a steadfast commitment to ensuring a just and equitable transition, one that empowers our workers, communities, and all of our society to define and drive the journey towards low emissions and climate-resilient development. Our national framework on just transition is designed to embed fairness and equity into our mitigation goal, while ensuring that equity and fairness remain at the forefront. For South Africa, transition pathways must create sustainable jobs, enhance livelihoods, and generate opportunities for localized industrialization, moving towards a genuine transformative process that supports an inclusive and competitive economy. In our collective commitment to achieve low carbon and climate resilient development, international cooperation and unlocking access to transition opportunities remains at the core. As developing economy countries, we have shared realities that constrain our abilities to transition. We face a lack of means of implementation, limited fiscal space, high costs of capital, debt burdens, limited access to technologies, and other factors. Critical within this is the lack of access to the transition's economic opportunities. On the question of the full range of means of implementation required to assist parties to advance the just transition pathways, the following key points need to be highlighted, and collective effort is necessary to address these. A clear message needs to be sent to the financial systems. The current global financial system is not designed to respond appropriately, and developing economy countries cannot access the scale and quality of finance required to support the just transition pathways and meet their nationally determined commitments. Call for urgent action to reducing the cost of capital. The high cost of capital in Africa is inhibiting our ability to access the transition socio-economic opportunities. In 2021, the average cost of capital for energy projects was about 7 times higher in Africa than in Europe and North America. Reducing the cost of international capital requires coordinated efforts from governments, financial institutions, and business to remove frictions which add costs. Technology transfer and skills development are another key enabler of just transitions. The UAE Just Transition Work Programme is extremely important in delivering on these priorities. It needs to play an active role in facilitating and integration of fairness and equity into the implementation of climate actions. The work program should guide how justice and equity is integrated in the implementation of the goals of the Paris Agreement, send signals to the international cooperation ecosystem to support parties in their transitions, and facilitate means of implementation and unlock additional quality finance. In conclusion, achieving the goals of the Convention and its Paris Agreement will be impossible without necessary means of implementation and international cooperation. Together, we can pave the way for an equitable, climate-resilient future for all. I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Excellency. I now give the floor to Kazakhstan for your intervention. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be here today to discuss one of the most critical elements of climate action, ensuring that our transition to a low-carbon future is fair and inclusive. As we make stride towards achieving global climate goals, we share a common responsibility to ensure that this transition is equitable, offering both environmental and socioeconomic benefits to all communities. For Kazakhstan, this principle of a just transition is central to our approach to climate commitments in our broader development strategy. As President of Kazakhstan Tokayev noted, the transition away from using coal should be social targets both long-term and under our LDCs. We're fully aware of the transformative impact this will have across economy, particularly in energy, agricultural and industrial sectors. We don't see this transition as a burden, but as an opportunity to foster a more resilient and diversified economy. However, that would require forging partnerships and working together. There are two aspects that need to be tackled under just transition. First, Kazakhstan is reliant on fossil fuels, particularly in certain regions where the majority of population is employed in fuel sectors. So it will be essential to support these areas with targeted investments in alternative sources of income. The new jobs that should be created need to also be equally paid at least. Second, the transformative impact of energy transition should not hit the most vulnerable population in the process. Therefore, to tackle the enormous challenge of transitioning away from coal in a socially responsible manner, there needs to be availability of climate and transition finance. For developing countries like Kazakhstan, predictable and accessible financing is essential to address the socioeconomic impacts of decarbonization. We need financial mechanisms, such as concessional finance, grants, and other long-term options that enable us to build resilience without sacrificing growth. Kazakhstan joins the call for frameworks that prioritize social equity, ensuring that the most vulnerable communities receive the resources they need to adapt and thrive in this new economy. Our commitment to a fair transition extends beyond our borders. By collaborating with neighboring countries and international partners, Kazakhstan seeks shared solutions to mobilize resources, share knowledge, and implement sustainable practices across the region. These objectives will be tackled as we prepare for a regional climate summit to be held in 2026 in partnership with the UN and other international organizations in line with the initiative of the President of Kazakhstan. As we look ahead, we remain steadfast in our dedication to an inclusive and sustainable transition. This journey will be challenging, but with inclusive policies, robust climate finance mechanisms, and international collaboration, we can protect both our planet and our people. Together, let us build an economy that is not only resilient, but equitable, a world where the benefits of a low-carbon future are accessible to all. It is said, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. And this should be a key principle in our transition journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I now give the floor to Cuba for your intervention.
Muchas gracias, copresidentes. Agradecemos el espacio para continuar reflexionando sobre la naturaleza que debe tener el programa de trabajo de transición justa y la importancia de su reforzamiento y operacionalización. Desde el desarrollo sostenible y la batalla de los países del sur por erradicar la pobreza en todas sus formas y dimensiones. En este sentido, el programa de trabajo debe dar espacio para el intercambio de experiencias y prácticas, mientras se reconocen los diversos modelos de desarrollo sostenible, vías y caminos que cada nación elija. La justicia climática, la equidad y los principios de responsabilidades comunes pero diferenciadas y capacidades nacionales respectivas deben estar en su centro. La discusión acerca de cómo estos pueden incrementarse es crucial. La transición justa abarca la adaptación, la mitigación, las pérdidas y daños y los medios de implementación. Para nuestros países en desarrollo es fundamental dar prioridad a la adaptación desde una perspectiva de transición justa, abordar la brecha de adaptación ya sea en capacidades nacionales de ciencia e innovación, financiación, planificación o implementación, debe alinearse con los criterios de transición justa hacia economías más resilientes. No será posible una transición verdaderamente justa, equitativa y ordenada sin que los países desarrollados honren sus compromisos y asuman el liderazgo en la acción climática y la provisión de financiación y medios de implementación para lograr los objetivos que plantea el artículo 2 del Acuerdo de París. El contexto internacional puede facilitar o convertirse en una barrera para dicha transición. La diferencia reside en una potenciación de la cooperación internacional por encima de políticas como las medidas coercitivas unilaterales y las barreras comerciales internacionales. Mi propio país, Cuba, que ha sido víctima del bloqueo económico, comercial y financiero más prolongado impuesto en la historia a ninguna nación, encuentra en esta política unilateral estadounidense su principal obstáculo para el desarrollo sostenible. Para ilustrarlo, se calcula que en el último año el bloqueo causó daños y perjuicios materiales a Cuba de más de 5.000 millones de dólares, lo que representa un incremento de 189 millones de dólares con respecto al año precedente. Es muy complejo de este modo llevar adelante un programa de transición energética integral, aunque existe la voluntad política y se buscan alternativas con el objetivo de lograrlo con la participación de toda la sociedad cubana. Por otro lado, desde una perspectiva operativa, con relación al programa de trabajo, apoyamos la necesidad de reforzarlo de manera progresiva, para la cual se pueden repensar elementos que van desde la selección de los temas de discusión, la realización de evaluaciones de los obstáculos internacionales para una transición justa, hasta abordar la provisión de financiación nueva, adecuada y accesible, la transferencia de tecnología y el desarrollo de capacidades nacionales para las diferentes vías de transición. Por último, debo reforzar que tal y como establece el Acuerdo de París, las contribuciones nacionales determinadas, los planes nacionales de adaptación y otros planes a largo término tienen una condición nacionalmente determinada. A la acción climática que el mundo requiere, máxime si se comprende la casi nula responsabilidad histórica que tenemos los países en desarrollo en la crisis actual. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Cuba. I now give the floor to Burkina Faso to make your intervention. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. In the outset, Burkina Faso would like to express its heartfelt gratitude to the SAPSTA and SBI Chair for their work and extend its appreciation to the Ministerial Co-Chair for their guidance and continued support, as well to the UNFCCC Secretariat. Burkina Faso aligns itself with statements made by Ethiopia on behalf of the LDC and Kenya on behalf of IGN. Burkina Faso reiterates the importance of the alignment of Just Transition Work Program with the NDC and SDG. We welcome the invitation and would like to share possible avenues to advance Just Transition pathway at the second annual high-level ministerial roundtable on Just Transition for your kind consideration as follows. Burkina Faso appreciates the UN consensus at COP29 outcome, recognizing the special needs and circumstances of LDC in terms of technology transfers and funding needs for the implementation of our NDC, NAP, and LTT LEDs. Poverty eradication, the right to development, decent green job creation, increasing productivity of agriculture and agri-processing, ensuring food security, energy access, and affordability while transitioning from biomass to renewable energy sources as crucial for Burkina Faso. Leveraging and domestic natural assets, Burkina Faso is a LDC. Home from critical minerals will support global green growth economy. Support for formalization of informal sector, the engine of LDC economies, focusing on micro, small, and medium enterprise is important to ensure just transition. Access to finance in the form of grants and concessional finance and mandating local multilateral development bank, national development bank to support the resource mobilization and encouraging LDC regional multilateral mobilization bank in a prerequisite for the implementation of our plan. Access to are crucial for implementing the just transition component of our NDC and NAPS. Capacity building and knowledge sharing key on people doing and managing NAP translate in local language. We believe that UU Just Transition Work Program needs a holistic approach to achieve its objective to achieving the goal of Paris Agreement outlined in Article 2.1 in the context of Article 2, Paragraph 2, with taking care of backsliding from the Paris Agreement. All measures for shifting toward transition should be put in place to minimize and reduce the risk and socio-economic cost of transition, taking into consideration of the specific condition and special circumstances of LDCs, including any additional reporting needs with burden already constrains LDC. Burkina Faso reiterates the importance of building back trust, therefore, equity for differentiate responsibility and respective capability. We emphasize the need for climate action to be equitable and in line with the principle of common by differentiate responsibility, also means of implementation. To conclude, by addressing this point, we can ensure a more comprehensive and inclusive approach to just transitions that align with the principles of equity, sustainable development, and international cooperation, ensuring that future dialogues reflect the widespread opinion of the parties on the topic according of their priorities, thereby guaranteeing a bottom approach. Approach for empowering all actors and segments of society for a fair and inclusive workforce transition to meet Paris Agreement goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Excellency. I now give the floor to Jordan to make your intervention.
Thank you, Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's universally acknowledged that the imperative to transition from business as usual to a paradigm that effectively confronts the challenges of climate change is urgent. This transition, however, must be inclusive, ensuring no individual, community, or nation is left behind. In Jordan, the development of our Green Growth National Action Plan was guided by the principle of social inclusivity as indispensable pillar of our green growth strategy. Central to this vision is the conviction that the social dimension must be seamlessly interwoven into the fabric of green economic advancement and the broader transition process. A just transition must equitably encompass all segments of society, with particular attention to those most vulnerable. This includes both rural and urban contexts. The shift to green economy will inevitably disrupt traditional employment landscapes, affecting some sectors, where it is paramount to provide robust support to these sectors, ensuring that the transition is not only equitable but also sustainable, fostering resilience across all sectors. At both national and global levels, just transition upholds the foundational principle of leaving no one behind. For developing nations, this requires substantive international support to ensure that the transition is not only achievable but also equitable. A truly just framework must acknowledge and accommodate the diverse capacities of nations, ensuring that global response measures do not strain the economies of developing countries. As articulated by His Royal Highness Crown Prince Al Hussein bin Abdullah, a just and inclusive approach to climate action is essential, intertwining the imperatives of climate, peace, and security. This holistic perspective underscores that climate responses must be deeply rooted within the broader socio-economic and geopolitical context. Moreover, the global endeavor for just transition must extend its scope to include refugee communities and their host nations, which are among the most acutely vulnerable to climate change impacts. These nations and communities must be recognized as an integral stakeholders in the global response, requiring targeted support to ensure their resilience and prosperity amidst the transition. A just transition is not merely an economic or environmental necessity, it is a moral imperative calling upon nations, institutions, and individuals to act collectively and compassionately to forge a future that is equitable, inclusive, and sustainable for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I give the floor over to Guinea. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, distingués invités, ce dialogue sur la transition juste est d'une importance capitale, car il reflète la nécessité d'équilibrer l'action climatique d'un côté et la justice sociale de l'autre, tout en garantissant des bénéfices tangibles pour toutes les communautés. En tant que pays en développement, doté de ressources naturelles abondantes, notamment dans les secteurs miniers et agricoles, la Guinée est confrontée à la double exigence de poursuivre sa croissance économique tout en réduisant son empreinte carbone. Dans ce contexte, la transition juste est non seulement une nécessité, mais une opportunité de transformation économique et sociale. Mesdames et Messieurs, nous reconnaissons tous aujourd'hui que la lutte contre plus propre et plus durable. Mais la transition elle-même entraîne des impacts sociaux, économiques et environnementaux plus larges pour les régions fortement dépendantes de l'utilisation d'énergies fossiles ou d'industries à forte intensité de gaz à effet de serre. Pour certains États et communautés, le processus de transition fait courir le risque d'accroître les disparités qui pourraient nuire aux objectifs de cohésion sociale, économique et territoriale. Et dans le cas de la Guinée, par exemple, nous faisons face à plusieurs risques. Le risque de déclin économique pour certaines communautés, car notre économie est basée sur des activités minières, agricoles, qui sont hautement dépendantes de la consommation d'énergie fossile. Également le risque de répartition inégale de la capacité de production d'énergie renouvelable. Les questions d'ensoleillement, de ventilation, de biomasse, de logistique, la disponibilité de technologies, la disponibilité de compétences pour leur déploiement, ainsi que leur opération et maintenance au niveau des communautés posent un véritable problème. À la vulnérabilité des groupes qui méritent une attention particulière en ce qui concerne les difficultés qu'ils rencontrent. Une large portion de notre population vit en milieu rural en position de précarité ou de pauvreté énergétique. La capacité de l'accès à l'information et de l'interpréter correctement pose un problème. Et cela limite leur participation à l'élaboration des politiques générales liées à la transition. Enfin, aux questions liées au coût des investissements qui restent entières. En effet, la plupart des solutions pour la transition énergétique nécessitent jusqu'à présent de lourds investissements qui ne sont pas facilement à la portée des communautés. En conséquence, le mécanisme de décentralisation et la transition vers les énergies propres et locales restent difficiles à atteindre. Avec une bonne compréhension des défis et des risques subventionnés, il devient évident que tout le processus de la transition doit être mené avec un esprit de justice et d'équité. Ainsi, s'il est clair que nous devons embrasser la transition énergétique pour nous, il est aussi nécessaire d'assurer la justice dans le processus. Et c'est pourquoi une stratégie politique solide et globale pour une transition juste, qui reflète des aspects communautaires, nationaux et mondiaux, et qui contient des instruments, des incitations financières et des mécanismes de soutien est essentielle pour faire face aux conséquences sociales, économiques et environnementales. Cette stratégie de justice doit être bâtie au moins sur les fondamentaux suivants. Veiller à ce que les processus décisionnels de la transition soient ouverts et inclusifs et s'assurer de reconnaître les groupes vulnérables et de prendre des dispositions spéciales pour eux. Pour finir, je lance un appel à tous d'œuvrer dans un esprit d'équité et de justice dans le combat commun et noble contre les changements climatiques, en approchant la transition énergétique de manière à éviter d'exacerber la vulnérabilité des populations que nous servons. Et pour la République de Guinée, c'est la seule manière de préserver notre planète pour les générations futures. Ensemble, nous pouvons bâtir un monde plus sûr, plus juste et plus résilient. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you, Excellency. I now turn
also from my side. Next, I would like to give the floor to Zimbabwe. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zimbabwe would like to express its gratitude and appreciation to the country of Azerbaijan for COP29 success. Your Excellencies, Zimbabwe aligns its views with those of Africa Group that just transition should be pursued in the context of sustainable development and eradication of poverty for our people. Sustainable development offers a comprehensive pathway to achieving ambitious climate change mitigation goals. A deliberate approach to use sustainable development as a framework can enable integration into transition pathways. Your Excellencies, Zimbabwe is still at its infancy with its just transition policies, but has made significant strides in overall formulation and development of mitigation and adaptation policies. And let me just mention a few that we have made. Number one, we have the nationally determined contribution commitments. And then number two, the long-term low emissions development strategy. Number three, national climate policy. Number four, climate change response strategy. And number five, national adaptation plan. And lastly, the climate change management bill, which is still under drafting. The process of updating nationally determined contributions, therefore, ought to go beyond the mere identification of mitigation actions that a party can undertake. But most importantly, to include the costing for shifting towards a low carbon economy in a way that is fair and equitable for all, especially for the workers and communities that are most affected by the shift. Cost quantification will assist in determining the true benefits of phase out of fossil fuels, for example, and provide planning authorities at all levels of our societies with a much needed data in the consideration and formulation of policies that will not inappropriately affect the workers and local economies. Your Excellencies, for Zimbabwe, therefore, the just transition leave no one and no place behind. It should create safety nets. It should promote skills development of affected workers and communities. It should create decent quality jobs and promote businesses with a high and positive social impact. In conclusion, I just want to remind everybody that this just transition is about our people, and therefore they should come first. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. We would appreciate if you could keep your interventions to below 3 minutes so that we could accommodate all the speakers who would like to take the floor today. Next, I would like to give the floor to Venezuela. Excellency, you have the floor.
Estimados colegas, distinguidos delegadas, delegados, señores y señores, es un honor para mí dirigirme a ustedes en esta importante mesa redonda sobre las transiciones justas, uno de los temas más importantes de la crisis multidimensional y la forma en cómo la afrontaremos. En nombre de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, quisiera subrayar algunos puntos cruciales que consideramos esenciales para avanzar en nuestras discusiones y en nuestras acciones. Somos conscientes de las enormes brechas de financiamiento que nos dificultan a los países en desarrollo luchar contra la crisis ambiental multidimensional y que nos afecta. Por ello, uno de los temas centrales que deben garantizarse para la transición justa son los medios de implementación. Estas transiciones no solo serán posibles y realmente justas si se proporciona el financiamiento adecuado, la transferencia de tecnología y el desarrollo de las capacidades, de acuerdo con los principios de equidad, responsabilidades comunes pero diferenciadas y capacidades respectivas. Las rutas hacia las transiciones justas deben ser plurales y diversas, abarcando dimensiones sociales, económicas y ambientales, considerando sus necesidades y realidades particulares, y teniendo en cuenta que dichas rutas de transiciones incluyen diferentes perspectivas de distintos modelos de desarrollo. Desde nuestro país fomentamos el ecosocialismo como un modelo alternativo al capitalismo que permita el desarrollo sostenible y un desarrollo en armonía con la naturaleza, enfocado en el bienestar de nuestro pueblo y en equilibrio con la madre tierra. Por eso consideramos dichas alternativas deben abordarse en el contexto de las rutas de las distintas transiciones justas, respetando las particularidades de los distintos países. Por otra parte, señoras y señores, para poder hablar de transiciones justas, no podemos seguir permitiendo que se sigan imponiendo medidas coercitivas unilaterales que son totalmente contrarias a los criterios de justicia climática y perjudican a los países en desarrollo y a los pueblos más vulnerables. Teniendo en cuenta estas consideraciones, creemos en desarrollo a gran escala. 2. La implementación de políticas que no representen una presión adicional sobre los países en vías de desarrollo incluyendo cargas de financiamiento y de tiempo o medidas prescriptivas que no se ajusten a nuestras circunstancias y realidades nacionales. 3. La evaluación de medidas coercitivas unilaterales y arreglos institucionales que actúan en contra o a favor de la ruta de la transición justa. 4. La ruta de la transición justa en el contexto de diversas perspectivas y horizontes de desarrollo. La invitación es a trabajar en conjunto para fortalecer estos aspectos y tomar medidas de adaptación y resiliencia climática, fundamentales para los países en desarrollo que reciben los impactos directos de estos eventos producidos por el cambio climático. Para hablar de transiciones justas, la justicia debe imperar en nuestras negociaciones en todos los niveles. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Excellency. Now I would like to give the floor to Zambia. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. From the outset, I wish to affirm Zambia's support for the position taken by the Africa Group, as ably highlighted by Kenya. Chair, let me also thank you for convening this very important high-level ministerial roundtable on just transition. To move to a low-carbon development trajectory and attain a green economy, there is need, Chair, to pursue just transition pathways. That is why, for us as Zambia, a just transition must maximize sustainable development and should prioritize eliminating energy poverty, growing economies, strengthening institutions, and supporting new industries with appropriately skilled workforce. Chair, responding to the first question, we are of the view that parties can advance just transition pathways by, 1, broad stakeholder participation, ensuring that processes of revising and updating NDCs as well as developing NAPs are consultative and enjoy broad stakeholder participation. Number 2, undertaking assessment. One of the biggest challenges in addressing the consequences of climate action is the uncertainty in net benefits as well as the distribution of cost and benefits among winners and losers. We must therefore ensure that we carry out qualitative and quantitative to identify and understand the agents of change in the just transition, including employers, the public sector, and public sector workers. Then we must effectively engage these agents of change through social dialogues and stakeholder consultations to build consensus for just transitions, objectives, and strategies. In Zambia, in the revision of our NDC, we are engaging all stakeholders, particularly the vulnerable, such as women, children, and the youth, and persons living with disabilities, to co-create a vision and conceptualize pathways to a just transition. The other point is institutional policy and capacity building. There is also need to strengthen social and economic policies to provide support for workers and enterprises for green jobs. The other point is that of finance. Public and private investment to support just transition strategies is essential. It will not be easy for poor countries to move away from the old way of doing things and embark on the just transition without meaningful support. Therefore, climate finance in support of a just transition is key to a successful low-carbon transition globally. As I conclude, the just transition requires means of implementation, including finance, capacity building, as well as technology development and transfer, Through international cooperation and support, the Global North must honor the climate obligations under the Convention and the Paris Agreement to enable the just transition of developing countries like Zambia. Finally, Your Excellency, we need to remind ourselves that the just transition will take place at different times and speed for different countries. In this regard, developed countries need to take the lead in the just transition process. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Excellency. Now I'd like to give the floor to Egypt. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In responding to the first question, allow me to start by stressing that just transition pathways should lead us to both low-emission economies and to more resilient economies if we are truly to uphold the notions of climate justice. Furthermore, we must differentiate between national and international contexts. That would enhance international cooperation as a driving force to enable implementation and raise ambition in national climate policies, i.e. NDCs and NAPs, and to enable countries to pursue their nationally determined transitions strategies, which must be coupled with their defined development priorities and include social protections so as to mitigate potential impacts associated with the transitions. The enabling international environment is not only limited to the provision of support from developed to developing countries, but should also include refraining from unilateral trade measures that hamper national efforts in achieving sustainable development and poverty eradication as prerequisites to the implementation of ambitious NDCs and NAPs. Each country's transition pathways are unique and different. There is no one-size-fits-all solution or prescription to transitioning to more resilient and low-emission economies. It is a long-term process that requires a whole of government and society planning to identify all implications of the transition, positive and negative, to unlock all potentials of means of implementation that are necessary to achieving the transitions. As for the implementation of NDCs and NAPs in the national context, all three means of implementation are critical to integrating just transition considerations. Finance, capacity building, and technology transfer, with a strong emphasis on finance, acknowledging the need to understand cost estimates in order to calculate the total financial resources required for implementing just transition initiatives. Regarding the second question, the program should support achieving the objectives of the Convention and its Paris Agreement in a just and equitable manner in the context of sustainable development and eradication of poverty. The new financial goals dimensions towards achieving low emissions and more resilient economies should be linked to the work program within the quantum discussions of the NCQG. Technology and capacity building support were identified as key components of international cooperation and highlighting the importance of coherence and synergy between different processes under and outside the UNFCCC, with international actors such as the United Nations and MDBs playing a supportive role in these efforts. The dialogues should also focus on unpacking the full range of means of implementation. This includes exploring current approaches, opportunities, and gaps. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before giving the floor to the next countries, I would ask you once more to keep your interventions within 3 minutes. In that way, we can all have the floor who have asked for it. Next, I would like to give the floor to Democratic Republic of Congo. Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente des séances pour la parole. Madame la Présidente, la survie de l'humanité n'est pas négociable. Je voudrais paraphraser les représentants des pays insulaires. La transition juste, Madame la Présidente, n'est autre que l'ensemble des mesures permettant d'assurer que la transition écologique bénéficie à l'ensemble des populations, de nos citoyens, et des travailleurs de manière équitable, socialement juste. Madame la Présidente, vous parlez de la transition énergétique et que nous puissions atteindre l'objectif que nous nous sommes assignés de maintenir la température planétaire à 1,5 degré Celsius, il faut des mesures, mais il faut aussi des ressources. Du Congo, nous en avons. Nous avons des ressources critiques, des minerais stratégiques qu'aujourd'hui les chefs d'État et de gouvernements d'Afrique ont décidé de les comptabiliser, de les quantifier en vue de les mettre dans le PIB, produit intérieur brut, pour que désormais ça constitue une matière de négociation. Parce que, Madame la Présidente, si nous prenons en compte les 3 questions qui nous ont été demandées pour que nous puissions y réfléchir, nous comprenons que la transition ne sera pas juste si les pays responsables des pollutions, qui sont responsables des émissions de gaz à effet de serre, ne tiennent pas compte d'abord des pays qui sont les plus vulnérables, notamment les pays insulaires, ainsi que les pays qui vivent dans les milieux désertiques, mais aussi les pays comme le nôtre, la République démocratique du Congo, qui est la réponse, la solution face au réchauffement de la planète, mais qui se trouve dans une situation de faire face aux terroristes et aux conflits armés. C'est l'objectif 16 des objectifs de développement durable qui doit être appliqué pour avoir la paix dans les différents pays, afin que nous puissions nous concentrer à la mise en place de nos programmes d'atténuation, programmes d'adaptation. Évidemment, ce sont les priorités qui sont classées dans nos CDN. Madame la Présidente, nous souhaiterions que les responsables, les représentants des pays ici présents, même si d'autres ont effectué des déplacements, mais je pense que tous les pays sont ici, de rappeler aux pays développés d'arrêter d'hésiter à contribuer pour la lutte contre le réchauffement de la planète. Les fonds dont nous exigeons ne sont pas les fonds en termes d'aide ou en termes de l'aide au développement ou en termes d'appui humanitaire. C'est leur propre contribution par principe des pollueurs-payeurs. Nous sommes arrivés à l'étape cruciale des négociations pour que nous puissions atterrir dans les engagements des résolutions applicables de la COP29. Il est hors de question que nous puissions avoir encore jusqu'à ce jour des États qui hésitent de prendre des engagements et de respecter leurs propres engagements. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Excellency. Next, I would like to give the floor to Mexico. Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. La transición justa es un tema esencial para la acción climática. Debemos trabajar para lograr transformaciones inclusivas e igualitarias que incluyan la creación de empleos decentes y la promoción de mecanismos de equidad para el acceso y uso de la energía a fin de abandonar los combustibles fósiles en los sistemas energéticos y alcanzar cero emisiones netas. Esencial para definir y establecer planes y estrategias de transición que tomen en cuenta las prioridades y capacidades nacionales. Estos planes deben de estar alineados con las estrategias nacionales desarrolladas por las autoridades locales, pero también incluir a otros actores que son fundamentales para la transformación inclusiva de los modelos de producción actuales. Particularmente, es necesario incluir a los pueblos indígenas, a las mujeres, a los jóvenes, las infancias, las personas mayores, así como a las y los trabajadores de los sectores energéticos tradicionales para que puedan transitar hacia nuevas oportunidades de energía verde. El crecimiento económico no puede ser el único eje rector en el diseño de políticas de transición justa, especialmente en un contexto en el que se requieren fortalecer nuestras acciones para erradicar el hambre y la pobreza y lograr una distribución igualitaria de los recursos. En ese sentido, es fundamental acelerar el desarrollo, fortalecer la transferencia de tecnología, la capacitación, la coinnovación y la transformación digital justa e inclusiva. Al mismo tiempo, nuestros planes nacionales de adaptación y las contribuciones determinadas a nivel nacional deben resaltar la importancia de otros medios de implementación, incluidos procesos de construcción de capacidades y la movilización de recursos financieros para garantizar una provisión financiera eficiente, transparente y equitativa para todas las regiones. México está convencido de que una visión social sobre la acción climática requiere sinergias entre los compromisos climáticos ambientales y de desarrollo como los establecidos en la Agenda 2030 y las demás convenciones de Río. Los diálogos continuos entre expertos en mitigación, adaptación y cuestiones transversales son esenciales para identificar las principales brechas y necesidades que aún enfrentan algunos países para desarrollar y presentar sus planes nacionales de adaptación y sus contribuciones determinadas a nivel nacional. No olvidemos que la acción climática y la transición justa deben basarse en la complementariedad de los esfuerzos de adaptación y de mitigación, promoviendo al mismo tiempo un enfoque transversal para garantizar la consideración de los derechos humanos, las cuestiones de género, la interseccionalidad, la equidad intergeneracional, así como la justicia climática. Señora Presidenta, para lograr estos objetivos debemos asegurar que el Programa de Trabajo para la Transición Justa presente recomendaciones claras para desarrollar un marco regulatorio que garantice el acceso social a los beneficios de las políticas ambientales, promueva el desarrollo tecnológico nacional y mejore los procesos de creación de capacidades. Elimine las desigualdades y barreras sociales para todas las personas, incluidas para las generaciones futuras. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Excellency. We still have 22 countries who have asked to take the floor, and as we have only 30 minutes left, I would kindly remind you to keep your interventions within three minutes. And next, I would like to give the floor to Moldova. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, co-chair. Distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, it is an honor to be here today participating in this important discussion on one of the most crucial aspects of our global climate agenda, the just transition. First, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the government of Azerbaijan for hosting this significant global climate event. A just transition is vital for equitably transforming economies in response to climate change. It is crucial to align climate action with social policies, particularly under the Paris Agreement, to balance environmental goals with socio-economic needs. Prioritizing inclusivity, equity, and human rights, a just transition must be tailored to national context and capacities. Climate policies should address both environmental targets and the socio-economic challenges faced by the most vulnerable. Moldova strongly supports the EU climate neutrality policy and the comprehensive approach of the European Green Deal to create a greener economy while ensuring that those affected by the transition are adequately supported. In line with these efforts, Moldova has been proactive in increasing its ambition for GIG emission reduction, updating its NDCs, and committing to a sustainable low-carbon future. Moldova is currently revising its NDC and is determined to contribute meaningfully to global efforts under the Paris Agreement. Moldova, through a low emitter, is highly vulnerable to climate change, with 1.2 degrees temperature rise, causing more frequent droughts, floods, and extreme weather. These impacts have devastated agriculture and ecosystem, leading to economic losses. In response, Moldova's National Climate Change Adaptation Program targets key sectors like agriculture, energy, health, and water management, but its success depends on adequate resources, financial support, and access to advanced technology and enhanced resilience and risk management. International cooperation is essential in achieving a just transition, especially for developing countries. It is not enough to provide financial support. It is critical that these countries also have a technical and institutional capacity to design and implement their own climate action plans. Moldova's commitment to climate resilience is underscored by our desire to build this capacity and share knowledge with partners. Accountability and robust monitoring frameworks are also essential. This system must track both climate and social outcomes to ensure that the commitments made are translated into tangible results. We must also view climate action not as an additional burden, but as an opportunity for economic growth, job creation, and social development. Stronger partnership with the private sector will play a pivotal role in driving the transition, especially in vulnerable and developing countries. Finally, as we look ahead, it is crucial to recognize that a just transition is not just about reducing emissions, but about ensuring that all people, regardless of background or geographic location, have an opportunity to thrive in low-carbon sustainable economy. In this regard, Moldova remains committed to working with international partners to ensure that our climate action are inclusive, equitable, and resilient. Together, we can forge a path to sustainable, low-carbon future that benefits everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Next, I would like to give the floor to State of Palestine. Excellency, you have the floor. Okay, I don't have...
It doesn't work?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Just transition is one of the cornerstones towards sustainable development or sustainable future, considering that minimizing environmental and socio-economic negative impacts. It should concentrate on the whole society approach and leaving no one behind. We believe that the just transition should take into consideration the national circumstances, and it should be aligned with the national priority as presented in the NDCs and the national adaptation plans. Additionally, it's very important to engage all stakeholders as early as possible. For example, workers are one of the main stakeholders, and they have the right to a decent and healthy workplace and extended opportunities to green jobs. In order to ensure the success of just transition, we need to, first, secure a full range of means of implementation, such as finance, technology transfer, and appropriate capacity building. Second, more international cooperation and knowledge sharing at both global and regional levels. Taking energy transition as an example, it's clear that it varies from one country to another country in terms of capacity and capability. The energy transition should consider the whole cycle of renewable energy, generation, storage, distribution, connection to grid, the disposal also of obsolete parts. Consequently, there is a need to upgrade the grid network, enhance capacities, and transfer the technology for storage, and the know how to dispose or treat the obsolete part in an environmentally safe manner. As I said before, the national circumstances are very crucial when addressing just transition, especially in unstable areas, such as the state of Palestine. Gaza and in West Bank, as well as Jerusalem. Thank you.